Hello, and welcome to this special series on the roles and opportunities for pharmacists in diabetes care. I'm your host, Kirsten Yield, the research manager at the Association of Diabetes Care and Education Specialists. Pharmacists can play a key role in helping to care for and educate people with diabetes, yet many don't feel comfortable in this position or don't know how expensive it can actually be. Joining us today is Jerry Meece, a longtime pharmacist and diabetes care and education specialist out of Texas. Jerry is well known in the diabetes world, serving in many national roles, and is a frequent speaker. He is a longtime proponent of pharmacists becoming involved in diabetes care, and we're excited to talk more with him about some key diabetes topics as they relate to pharmacists. Jerry, welcome.
Hey, great to be back.
Well, last time you were on, we ended the show or ended our conversation talking about showing up and presence. And I'd love if you could share a little bit with our listeners about what you mean by that, because it really is an important topic.
Well, I think the question I get asked more when I get the opportunity and the privilege of speaking across the country to pharmacists and diabetes educators, especially with pharmacists, is how do I get started? Where did I begin? And I think one of my favorite adages comes from an older pharmacist that was on a project says, this thing starts when you began. It starts when you began. It starts by showing up. And
Mm.
uh, uh, great actor at one point said, 80% of success is just showing up. And it's amazing how we want to do things, but uh, we forget that we really need to be present to do this. So show up. Once you've shown up, there's an opportunity to start. There's a place to begin from there. You want to be more involved in the grand rounds or in the dealings and workings of hospital administration. Show up, being present at formulary committees, at grand rounds, looking for the opportunity somewhere to speak for what pharmacists really can do as professionals and what you would like to volunteer to do. Sometimes it's not immediately rewarding, but it does put you at a different level than possibly what people thought you were doing as a pharmacist. So, you want to become the go to pharmacist for diabetes management and care, show up. Start with something. Start by creating a space,
Mhm.
maybe in your pharmacy that's a consulting area. Doesn't have to be fancy, just has to be semi private. Start by making a department or a planogram specifically dedicated to diabetes management and care, meters, blood pressure equipment, blood glucose strips, and train your staff and yourself to really be the go-to answer guy for every product that you've got right there. Uh, Look up the American Diabetes Association, ADCES also, and explain to your staff what you're doing in working with these groups. All these things are ways to just show up and begin. Showing up means being part of something that's new, and you need to explain this to your staff, and you need to have a meeting and say, we're going to do things that are different than we're used to doing. And this is why. These are the benefits of us being what I call the go to pharmacy in the area. Show up by being the premier expert in technology and diabetes care. Uh, you know, Libre is out there right now, and they've got a new Libre 2 CGM meter is out there. How does that compare to Dexcom? And what are the nuances of that? There are so many smart meters out there. If you go to uh, a site called danatech.org, for example, that has so many devices on there and so many instructional videos and so many things that if you've got a question about it, if something comes up, you want to know more about the nuances, learn it. Be committed. This is your goal for the next week to 2 weeks to say, I'm going to learn two new devices that I've just heard of, and I'm going to be the expert on those devices. Uh, Show up with knowledge of what we've talked about earlier, how to get insulin started quicker, how to get it paid for. Read the updates that your new goal now is. Now that you're showing up, you're going to read every article you can find about diabetes. You're going to tear them out, put them in a file, and read them at the first chance you get. And how about that website? I know you got a website. So Is that website up to date? Does it have something new about a device or what you've learned that you can share? That's another small commitment and goals. So, creating these goals, these chances of opportunities for yourself is the way to get started. And it all begins with that first step of just showing up one morning and saying, we are going to be a diabetes care center.
So that's an incredible life lesson. Just those words, just show up, is and having presence is such a life lesson. And but when I hear you really talk about it, it seems like momentum. Like by showing up and being present and involved, it's building this internal foundational momentum maybe. But
It is.
how does that really, like, deep down, how does that relate to diabetes care?
Well, I think no one becomes a diabetes care and education specialist overnight. Even when you're that, no one becomes the expert overnight. Regardless whether you're a physician, whether you're a pharmacist, dietitian, nurse, no one does this. You do it in increments and in steps. If you were my diabetes patient, I say, we're going to learn about diabetes and I'm going to give you a degree in diabetes management, but we're going to do it like we eat an apple a bite at a time. And this would be exactly the way I tell pharmacists, creating a whole wall department area and everything else that you've got is fantastic if you can do it. But if you can't, let's just eat this apple a bite at a time. Let's agree that we're going to be insulin experts, that we're going to be better at management. So we're going to create this department and we're going to make a big signage. We're going to make that work so that people come in. Anyone's got a question about diabetes, I want to know. So that's the way I think you get into it deeper and you get into it better is just by the experience. And I can't emphasize enough belonging to associations that are absolutely dedicated, to diabetes care and management, like ADCES. There are a large number of pharmacists that are members of that that give lectures every year in and out of that, and the networking is so essential that you can sit down and say, just tell me what's the first or second or third thing I need to do. I heard you bring this up. Can you say a little more about it? Every time I get someone who cares enough about that when they approach me, that they would actually pull me aside, give me a card and say, I need to know more, it makes me really want to help them even more. So, networking, being a part of that, is all part of building up on your diabetes skills.
I love that you gave 2 approaches because we all come from a different place, right? So, I mean, it's all in or take a bite out of the apple. Take one of those approaches and you can do something. It kinda reminds me of from previous conversations we've had about, the exposure time that a pharmacist, diabetes care and education specialist has with people with diabetes. I think you've told me that, a pharmacist can see a person with diabetes 35 times a year, and a physician, it's 4 times a year. So you really have an opportunity with this all in approach or this bite out of the apple. You have 35 times a year, right?
Yeah, we may see them more than a month, and the physician sees them in a year.
Right.
They are taking anywhere from 4 to 6 prescriptions on the average to as many as 15. So it's not just them; it's them, their wife, and the 3 kids. So you're taking care of this whole family. So you have all these touch points, all these opportunities. These don't have to be something that draws you aside and you lose 30 minutes out of your day. The skill that you develop and the way you learn to do this is, I have a few minutes for a quick question from you if you've got it. And what drives you crazy about your diabetes, or what's the biggest problem you have with your diabetes? And using that time efficiently to answer a question that they really needed to know and makes them manage their diabetes so much better. So that's what you learn. I think you do that just on a continual basis. You kind of go back and you make some notes and you say, this is what I'll do better next time.
I'm just imagining, with the exposure and the time that you see with people and seeing and seeing their families and looking at it as the whole picture. I imagined that this pandemic with COVID-19 for the past, over the past year has been just an incredible experience. And I'm sure you have stories and thoughts and ideas to share. Not enough for our 10 minutes here, but I would love it if maybe you came back and shared a little bit more about that with us.
Oh, I think, every conversation that we begin these days can start with in lieu of COVID, and you just finish out what you're going to say. In lieu of COVID, we closed our doors and used our drive-in window in lieu of COVID. So yes, that's a whole nother conversation to start with. But if there's one takeaway from this is, be present, show up, and that's where you begin. Okay. If we can do that, I'm going to get t-shirts printed and we'll get them out to everybody. I think that'd be a great idea.
Awesome. Thank you, Jerry. I'm looking out for my t-shirt.
Hey, it's great. It's in the mail, as we say. Thanks very much, Kirsten. Thanks for having me again.
All right, thanks. Bye.